There's a line in Cardboard Computer's point-and-click adventure Kentucky Route Zero that switched on some light in my head when I read it for the first time, where Shannon, one of the main characters, looks up at the abstract and textured concrete protruding up into the night sky around them, and asks Conway, the player character, "This is weird, but are we inside or outside?" You have three different options when answering this question: inside, outside, or both. Kentucky Route Zero often throws these perception-shifting questions at you to make you question if something could be viewed differently, or just to make you think about things in a flip perspective. While that's great for the narrative of Kentucky Route Zero, it sparked a different thought in my brain. Specifically about spaces I've seen across media and life that are described by that line. A lot of my favourite set pieces in games and other mediums are not the greatest spectacles or the most stunning visuals, but instead the surreal and the ethereal, the artificial and the infinite. I'm at university right now, and while I see friends and make social appearances as often as I can, being at university is the most alone I've ever been. That's not to say I'm lonely, at all, but I've lived with my parents for the first 17 years of my life. To say that I've been experiencing more solitude recently than ever before would be an understatement. A lot of student life at a university exists within liminal space. I don't mean that it exists within those unsettling photos you see passed around social media, although student accommodation isn't far off that. Instead, I mean a lot of my day-to-day life happens within the limen, the transitional period between one thing and another. Everything from going to class, going to a shared kitchen to make food, going for a weekly shop or going to the gym, from getting ready for exams to going to the library. There's constant transition happening all the time. While there's a lot of moving parts in my life, there is something comforting in that individual experience. Spending a substantial amount of time in liminal space, you start to warm up to the environments and the spaces in between. In fact, that uneasiness mixed in with comfort is what liminal space images stem from. Removing the destination so that you're just left with the limen, forever in a transitional state. I'm often surrounded by liminal space, and I take a lot of notice of the architecture around me. Breadcrumb trail-like fire exit signs, staircases with no windows, smothering fluorescent lighting in the empty atrium of the Students' Union. It does interest me in some ways how these places were designed and why specific design choices were made. Often it's clear why a building or a space was designed the way it was, but sometimes I find myself wondering who exactly decided to make something look the way it does. The fact I can't wrap my head around that question when I find myself in a large structure or building is a slightly uncomfortable feeling. When I'm not sure how a building came to be or who designed it at all or when it was built, it places me in a position of doubt where I have no knowledge other than that this place is here and I have no idea how it got here. It makes it all feel very artificial, like the people who walk through and use these facilities are similar to bugs, carrying out the actions that someone has designed this place for them to carry out. Something far more skeptical within me starts to wonder if these buildings even had a creator at all. The cold open of Playdead's Inside is so stripping of comfort. To an experienced player, there's familiarity in the tropes seen in other side-scrollers, but these themes are uncannily skeletal and hollow. There is nothing here. No context, no names, and no story. You can only move forward. There's nothing behind you, which isn't uncommon in similar titles. Every game has its limitations, but the stripping of information in Inside's opening scene begins to form questions that almost beg to be answered. Inside's story is told completely without words. Instead, a narrative of sorts plays out entirely by the player asking questions and figuring out the world by themselves. For the first time ever, there's a reason to question such a natural function and process as moving forward. Behind the player character is a steep rock wall, oddly emblematic of a blank slate, which is how the story of Inside begins. There is a void of all basic knowledge. Who am I? Why did I just slide down this wall? What am I doing? Where am I going? Through the process of moving forward, there is no comfort of progression towards any type of goal. There's only the formation of knowledge upon the blank slate of the mind that is carved through the simple act of moving from left to right. But there's no safety in this action. Beyond the four corners of a monitor or television, there is no certainty of continuation. There is no absolute truth that can prove to us that there isn't an infinite nothingness a few feet in front of our faces. We simply have no choice but to find out. Insight sweeps the rug of a comfort zone out from under our feet before we have even taken the first step. But what can you do but move forward? There's a large overbearing concept of loss and free will throughout the game. Through different forms of mind control and also just in the way you move through the set pieces with no idea where you're going, but somehow a certain and definite understanding of the desire to move forward towards something, which lines up well with the game's opening. If our only choice at the beginning was to move forward, did we really have free will in that choice? The set pieces of Inside I would instantly describe as artificial. Feels like you're in a place that civilization has not yet seen, but somehow you find yourself in the middle of man-made structures which have clearly been made with a specific purpose in mind. What that purpose is exactly is unclear. Inside's setting is dark, not just in its colour palette, but in its world as well. The industrial setting is almost smothering in its openness. The coldness of the empty warehouses and structures that appear almost superficial in size, their sheer scale making it completely incomprehensible that they could ever possibly be man-made. The further forward you make it inside, the more you feel the weight of everything that has accumulated thus far. Most of the tone in the game exists simply to deceive. The lighting is no exception. No matter where you are, deep underneath a building or even inside a large building with no windows, there is never complete darkness. Slithers of the indistinguishable orange tint of sunlight trickle through tiny cracks and holes, even when you believe there is no possible way that light could be reaching where you stand. But this comfort of the warm glow of sunlight is harshly contrasted by the pressing, freezing cold white of artificial lights that are tangled within the warm natural sun. The cold tone of the artificial brightness that reaches much further than the sunlight ever could often creates feelings of being watched, like an interrogation room. Inside takes this tone and antagonizes it, often presenting it as a watch drone or a huge entity searching for intruders to shock and incapacitate. It's the image of searchlights, of torches, and of the organization you try to infiltrate. Even when deep within the structures and buildings, past all the testing and amidst the hive mind being tested on in some way, and the rubble of some dystopian city of sorts, even when trains pass in the distance carrying hundreds of controlled people, there are still these drones and people with dogs searching for people. Why, hundreds of meters past barriers and gates, are there still search teams? Who are they so adamant on searching for? Are they specifically searching for me? Because Inside is a 2.5D platformer, the foreground and background is often used to show how far this artificial place stretches. There's train lines, even running trains going through this place. Often a horizon stretches past many more buildings which could contain anything in them. Feels like the line you take throughout the game is only scratching the surface of the world you've stepped into. But even then, the very tip of the iceberg you see in the game is so vast and gaping that I very often found myself in complete disbelief. Like when you crash through some wooden planks in a section of the game where you're in a submarine and find yourself in a vacuum of water. It all feels so wrong, so inhuman, and so distrustful. That's why near the end of the game, when you've reached the true testing facilities, it feels so much more dark and deceitful than if you'd got to them at the beginning of the game. Why on earth, after hours of running and hundreds of meters underground, are there so many scientists here? Eventually, when you do find out why, there are no words to describe those first moments with the discovery. But I won't spoil that in this video. Surprisingly, huge testing facilities that appear so artificial that you can't imagine a human being ever designing them are more common than I originally thought. I'm sure some of you are picturing the Aperture Science test chambers in Portal. GLaDOS, the robot tasked with overseeing the test facilities, kills almost all of the scientists and other inhabitants around the enrichment center with a deadly neurotoxin. When you wake up in your test chamber in Portal, GLaDOS begins to guide you through a completely empty testing facility where, assuming you don't have the knowledge that the cake is a lie going in, you have no idea where you're going or why there's nobody else around. What unfolds is, to put it simply, unsettling. GLaDOS guides you through the test chambers, having a personality core built into her to force her to say good things about what you're doing. You have nothing to your name at the beginning of the game, so GLaDOS and her pre-recorded messages are all you have to cling to. It's quite parasocial in itself. Portal even toys with this parasocial relationship later on by giving you a companion cube, which you grow strangely attached to in the short time you're with it just because it has a pink heart on it, before GLaDOS forces you to cast your companion cube, your only friend in this place, into an incinerator. Similarly to Inside, and one thing I love about Portal, is it is again laid out before you in questions and theories instead of exposition. The further you progress through the testing chamber, the more you wonder why you haven't seen a single other person in this place, or the walls that were clearly designed to be sterile and clean are now decayed to the point of discolour and grime. To repeat my original point, it is so unsettling. You're in this facility that's clearly man-made and designated for human use, but you have no idea how it was made or by who. A completely man-made facility, now an utterly artificial place in appearance. I can immediately connect that feeling to how I feel sometimes walking around my university. Sometimes on those late night runs to study spaces in the gym, I'd find myself in atriums and hallways that were completely empty, already cleaned by cleaners who had long since finished their shifts, sanitized and untouched, isolated, abandoned. Newspaper stands fully stocked, filled to the brim with papers detailing all the exciting events happening around the uni in the upcoming days. But as I stood and gushed over the pages of the freshly printed student newspaper, I started to consider how empty and untouched this place felt. I considered a world where I'd stepped into a different reality somehow, stuck in a world where I was the sole survivor, in these places with no owner, with no builder and no workers, with no trace of even a foundation of human life, just a plastic, fake world made for me. So let's connect that now to the second part of this video: infinite space, infinite ideas, and infinite possibilities. The topics actually mix together very well, because just as how we can't wrap our heads around buildings and places being completely artificial and fake, it's hard to grasp the concept of a completely infinite world, where form and matter mean nothing in the vacuum of endless existence. The first time I heard Hilbert's paradox of the Grand Hotel, I felt I had heard something illegal. Can infinity plus one exist? The short answer is yes, kinda. The long answer is Hilbert's paradox. Close your eyes for a second. Or don't, the screen's gonna go black anyway. I want your mind to walk you through this thought experiment. Imagine a hotel with an infinite number of rooms, and the hotel is fully booked. Somebody walks in and asks for a room, and although the hotel is fully booked, the hotel manager simply asks everyone in the hotel to move up one room. So the guest in room 1 moves to room 2, the guest in room 2 moves to room 3. This is Hilbert's paradox. This is infinity plus 1. An infinite number can still interact with a finite concept in a mind-bending way. By this logic, infinity times infinity is also possible. Say a bus with an infinite number of people pulled up to a hotel. The manager would ask everyone to move to the room that was 2 times the number of their room, making double the room in the hotel for an infinite number of people. That concept is far too much for my brain to handle. Just the thought of infinity plus 1 is almost too much for me to comprehend. How can the 1 still be relevant and accounted for in the infinite? In William Shear's Manifold Garden, you are the 1 in the infinity of Hilbert's paradox. Manifold Garden is what infinity looks, sounds, and feels like. Infinity is just a concept, an abstract thought. It has no real value to our minds. We can't comprehend it. But before even comprehending it, we can see it with our own eyes. In this case, seeing is far from believing. Manifold Garden is the shape of infinity. It's boundless in the way that its ceilings hold no rooms, its floors are its walls. The geometry of this place means nothing, it's meaningless. And yet it is all that exists and ever will exist. Manifold Garden is a puzzle game. There's no jump button, so you're constantly shifting gravity to work out rooms and different challenges. Sometimes when you have to reach a different place, you have to fall to the next floor under it, each floor being repeated endlessly into the void. Each identical, probably the same, but the answer to if it is or not is completely irrelevant in this place. Sometimes when I got stuck, I'd think to myself, I'll just drop down to the floor below me. So I'd drop down, and drop down again, and again, and again. And each time I did, something within me would still tell me, when I knew it was impossible, that eventually I would reach a ground somewhere. This place can't just go on forever. It shouldn't be possible. Although I'm staring into the endless symmetry below me, I can't comprehend it, not even for a second. Visions of architecture, of pre-existing spaces I've seen before dart through my mind, with the thought rushing in that it's all here. All architecture and all design possibly and probably exists within infinity. Within one set of a billion floors of a real infinity of shapes and designs, I'd probably run into every building I've ever seen before and then some. This room alone sent shivers down my spine, and made me take each step like I was walking onto a new planet. Each door in Manifold Garden can lead somewhere completely new, often not even making sense considering what the door looked like. You'll go through a tiny door in an infinite void with a few platforms into an endless hallway of staircases and pillars. It's not scary, but I'm not sure if I feel frightened or not. I had to stop playing after a few hours. It unfortunately made me ridiculously motion sick with its perspective shifting puzzles. I wonder if it really did make me motion sick though. I've had far fewer problems in virtual reality with motion sickness than I did after 30 minutes of gameplay with this art piece. I actually think I might have just not been able to handle it. I felt like I was buried in an avalanche, no way of telling whether up was down or down was up. Surrounded by so much snow that I was suffocating. Boundless geometry is suffocating, no matter how much space you put between me and the infinite void. I still feel like the air is pushing me together. There's surprisingly not that much I can say about infinity in this way. It's funny, my mind just goes blank when I see it, but there is something deep within me that tells me, stay away from this place. With the recent and well-deserved hype of its first season, I'm going to give a full spoiler warning to the Chainsaw Man manga ahead. I'm not spoiling anything really huge, however I am just prefacing it so nobody is upset by the following segment. If you didn't heed my warnings but don't know what Chainsaw Man is about, basically devils that have the characteristics of their names live amongst and kill humans. So the tomato devil is a devil which is a tomato, that kind of thing. However feared the name of the devil is how powerful it is. A knife devil would be a lot more powerful than a tomato devil, because nobody is that afraid of tomatoes. Devil hunters can make agreements with devils to use their powers in order to hunt other devils. It makes sense in the show is all I can really say. I hope that a brief explanation was enough to run with this, but we'll run with it anyway. In Volume 8 of Chainsaw Man, something terrible happens. Nobody dies, at least nobody too important. With Chainsaw Man, you have to take what you can in terms of people dying. No, when I say something terrible happens, what I can only describe as true horror is unveiled. Something that couldn't even be conceived of before. As different international assassins converge with our main Chainsaw Man Denji to steal his heart, suddenly one of the assassins stops and says this: "I offer my heart and my beloved children. In exchange, Hell Devil, please call all living things in this department store to hell." All the characters we've seen fighting so far get pulled into darkness, and suddenly, A narrative that's been fairly straightforward and explains each detail of its world to us gets enveloped in a dark silence. Hell. All of the characters get cast into hell. It's not the hell we've come to know with the eternal flames and torture, but judging by the reactions of some of the devils working alongside the hunters, we've fallen into something far worse. And what is the vision we're greeted by? A grassy field, with doors lining the ceiling stretching far off into oblivion. Infinity. Not flames, not torture, not darkness, but infinity. An infinity of endless possibilities, literal doorways to a different reality, one that we will never have a glimpse of, one that could be hiding any sorts of monstrosities from us. As the humans look around and begin to try and collect their wits, the devils amongst them begin to panic. They know something we don't. We are being watched. We're being watched by a dangerous devil. Far beyond here, devils far, far more dangerous than some gun devil. They're the transcendent devils who have never once experienced death. The very instant we draw their hostility, we'll die. A presence so powerful and so feared that its existence alone is enough to feel it, where it is, and where it's going. In an infinite void of doors, one suddenly opens, and out comes the Darkness Devil. The Darkness Devil itself is the main threat in which the characters face, and although it brings about horrors the likes of which we've never seen up until this point, its existence was almost a footnote to my main take from this section. A hell exists in this universe that many of the characters are entirely aware of, that hosts infinite possibility and existence within it, including deities far beyond our understanding. Just that in itself was sickening enough, even without the big bad thrown in it. It's hard to just overlook this place and its sheer existence. I really cannot stress enough that this was such a left turn in the manga. In fact, I'd go as far as to say it nearly doubled the world building in the whole series in this exact moment. Suddenly, nowhere, nothing and nobody is safe from the uncertainty of the infinite possibility. When people discuss the topic of exoplanets and marvel at the fact that we are so lucky to exist on a planet perfectly aligned with our slither of existable atmosphere and environmental surroundings that humans can live within, I see that as less of a miracle, but rather an impossible truth. I can't wrap my head around the fact that our miracle existence on this Earth is our centre of an infinity stretching every direction around us. Out there above us is endless existence and possibilities, our very own creative machine, ever expanding. Everything we know and ever will know is out there somewhere in an infinite number of forms. That in itself is almost impossible for me to grasp. How the concept of infinity works will never be comprehended properly by our minds. Every hill and every tree, every mountain, every city, every ocean, is one of a series of infinite valleys and seas that stretch off into oblivion somewhere in the cosmos. It's a perspective shift that I'll never be able to grasp. Megastructures are where we take this leap in geometrical and architectural logic to its logical conclusion. Gigantic artificial objects inconceivably made by intelligent life. Some describe megastructures at the lowest level as any object larger than 1 megameter, or 1,000 kilometers. But megastructures may also be defined as any structural framework into which houses, rooms, or other small buildings can later be installed, uninstalled, and replaced, and which is capable of unlimited extension. Unlimited extension. What we are talking about here is an endless artificial construction and engineering. Boundless artificial space. Existing megastructures are few and far between. The Great Wall of China, constructed over 2 millennia, its longest section sprawling over 3,000 kilometers, but altogether its lengths add up to about 20,000 kilometers. The longest man-made structure ever made. The Large Hadron Collider, a ring of 23 kilometers designed to be the world's largest particle accelerator. To further our understanding of the world and matter around us, it smashes particles together to create larger ones, which scientists can study. Its mere existence was enough to worry some that it might somehow destroy the planet someday. Most megastructure concepts are more hypothetical, a technical marvel, often a technical impossibility. The one that immediately springs to mind for me is the Death Star, a moon-sized superweapon capable of destroying planets, something we're almost lucky we'll never see the likes of in our lifetimes. Megastructures can take any form. The criteria is they just have to be incredibly large. Let's go back to that Kentucky Route Zero quote for a second. This is weird, but are we inside or outside right now? Hearing this line also resonated with me because this perfectly describes the idea that the set pieces of Tsutomu Nihei's Blam take and transform into an endless array of shapes, structures, and space. The city, the name of the megastructure Blam centers around, is a huge series of Dyson spheres and structures that take up much of the solar system as we know it today. Humanity began construction of the city in tandem with robot builders, before humanity lost control of the robot builders, who began to continue to build without purpose, creating this uncontrolled, random, and excessive architecture, which stretches over 1 billion kilometers, even engulfing Jupiter's orbit. The line between synthetic and human is blurred in the city, so is space and time. With the city being the size it is, space becomes completely irrelevant, and synthetic humans can live for thousands of years. It's easy to give praise to any manga by saying every page and panel is a work of art. Lots of mangas have very talented artists who dedicate themselves and their time to create art out of their drawings. However, I feel few have done it quite how Nihei sculpts the world of Blam almost entirely without words. Page after page can go by without a single speech bubble or word to grant information. Almost everything is simply told through the surroundings and the set. There is no how, no why, no who, and no what. Simply where. Reason turns to nothing, as does purpose. We can see with our eyes that this is existence now. This is all there is to be and all there will be. Blam even begins in total silence. The second page shows this artificial chasm stretching as far as the eye can see. No life, no light, and no floor. Light trickles in where it can through the cracks between two huge slates of metal and wire. The sun has long since forgotten some places in the New World. It's difficult to wrap your head around the perspective of the whole thing. Sometimes you'll see characters standing on the floor between two giant walls stretching off into the stratosphere. Then you'll realize that it's probably not the floor. Just a floor of a series of levels probably millions of kilometers off the real ground. The structure often takes a completely abstract shape. However, very occasionally you get these faint glimpses of real architecture. Statues and pillars, rooms resembling that of a real artistic vision. It's a strange sight. I can only equate it to how we now view Roman or Egyptian architecture today. Buildings from before our time crumbled into ruin, decaying, dismantled, and forgotten. There's something very alluring about it all though. Every possible piece of human architecture to ever exist probably exists somewhere in this city. Blam takes place tens of thousands of years in the future, so the chances of there even being any modern human life in the city is extremely slim. The story of Blam is hopeless in a way. Like I said, it's the places you see that say more than the occasional people. Even the main character, Killy, doesn't really know what's going on. He's 3,000 years old and experiencing a lot of memory loss due to his aging. What it creates for me is this kind of hopelessness between the last few surviving settlements and groups, the bounty hunters, the robots, anyone else still alive in the city. It's post-apocalyptic. We're at the end of everything. Human existence, the existence of our plane, the existence of the night sky around us. Everything has been engulfed in plastic and metal, completely eclipsed by the artificial and the infinite. In a huge megastructure designed to host life and give life to us with energy and power, who knew that the only life that would exist here would be survival? So if everything is fake, artificial, infinite, why scream into the void? What's the point of doing anything if you're just a speck in a world not made for you? Because you are the one in Hilbert's paradox. You are the sole outlier. A world not made for you, yet you exist. In Kentucky Route Zero, when you're not sure if you're outside or inside, you still stand in the middle of it all. We are all the centre of our own infinities, stretching outwards further than we can understand, but ultimately having one centre. Our own mind, our own body, one's soul and one's purpose. You are the miracle of life in the desolate vacuum, the impossible existence in an infinite void of possibilities, the slither of life we all exist in on Earth, just being warm enough and just being cold enough, being able to eat and drink. It all exists in a one in infinity chance. Our existence is the most infinitely impossible thing I've talked about in this video. Your purpose is to exist, to be an oddity, to go against odds that you could be standing in a universe you had almost no chance of being born into. If it's all fake, then what's the point? Well, it's all fake except you, and that's gotta mean something. You are real, right?
Black smoke's arising and it surely is a train. Surely is a train, boys, surely is a train. Black smoke's arising and it surely is a train. I'm on my